Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our third and final day of the 2022 New Mexico Summit on Health Equity. I'm Bianca Kurtzen with Constellation Consulting. The summit is funded by the New Mexico Department of Health Nicotine Use Prevention and Control Program. For more information about the summit, please visit our website at nmhealthequity.org. Due to COVID-19, this year's summit remains an online event. We appreciate those who have participated and supported us with planning this year's health summit. I also want to encourage you to all utilize the Summit on Health Equity app. I noticed that a few of you have been pretty active, but for those of you who have not been on it yet, the Whova app provides you all with opportunities to network, create discussion groups, visit our exhibitor pages, download any files that may have been provided by our presenters and speakers, and much more. It's a great tool for you not only to use during our live sessions, but also after the event. Using the app also allows you to earn points, which that means prizes. Please check out our leaderboard in Whova for more information. So for our session today, we're asking attendees to stay muted. If you have questions today for the presenters, please use the Q&A function in the Whova app, and we will address the questions at the end of the session. If time allows, we'll have an opportunity to be able to unmute you if you have questions directly for the presenters as well. If you need assistance during the session, please utilize the Q&A function or to ask the organizers anything in Whova as well, or email us directly at info@constellationnm.com. Following today's session, we appreciate you if you would take a few minutes to give us some feedback by clicking rate in the session in the Whova app. If you would like to request your CEU for community health workers or social workers, please include your name, email address on the evaluation, and the CEU certificates will be emailed to you within 60 days from the summit. If you need assistance or have questions on CEUs, please email us at info@constellationnm.com. Finally, before we begin today, Constellation acknowledges that our organization operates primarily on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Tiwa-speaking peoples. Racism has no place in our communities. Constellation Consulting and our team members are committed to racial equity. We acknowledge and denounce the violence and discrimination affecting Black and Asian and Pacific Islander communities with whom we stand in solidarity. We are New Mexico, and we are built strong by diverse people of our communities. There are a variety of organizations supporting health equity throughout our state. We have listed just a few here to encourage each of you to seek out, learn more, become involved with, and support organizations who are building a better New Mexico for us all. So without further ado, we are excited to have Ms. Alicia Ortega and Jamie Glochet. They are the co-directors and co-owners of NativeWomenLead. Alicia Ortega is from the pueblos of Buaque and Santa Clara. She's the co-founder and co-director of strategy and growth at NativeWomenLead, where she oversees the general operations of the organization and leads key initiatives, including storytelling and communications, policy and advocacy, the Fair Trade Initiative, community engagement, and partnerships. She brings over a decade of experience working with minority and tribal owned and operated businesses and entities from startups to established businesses. Ms. Jamie Glochet is also the director and co-founder of NativeWomenLead, where she leads key initiatives to access to capital, partnership, and advancement, as well as policy advocacy, while overseeing program design, international development, and data and evaluation efforts. She has wide-ranging experience serving as a leader and working with diverse teams across non-for-profit, government, and corporate sectors. Thank you so much for being here, ladies. Please help us welcome Jamie and Alicia. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So we have a slide deck prepared for you all this morning. I'm going to hand it over to my teammate Alicia if you want to go ahead and get us started.
Thank you, Jamie. Umbiakindi sengit hamu na Alicia Ortega angomu hera navitewa hawiate povi hera posuege owinge hera kapo owinge warangomu hango hichampo na ta umdari iweke koreri. With respect to you all, good morning. My name is Alicia Ortega, and my Tewa name is Evergreen Blossom. As mentioned, I'm from the pueblos of Kapo Owinge and Posuage Owinge, where I grew up in northern New Mexico. But I'm tuning in today from Tiwa territory, also known as Albuquerque, where NativeWomenLead is headquartered. And I just want to say thank you so much to Bianca and Suzanne and all of you for joining us today and for this opportunity to share the work that we do at Native Women Lead. I can go ahead and start us off and just share a little bit. Can everyone see my screen okay? Yeah, we're good. Okay, great. Let's see. Oh my, trying to advance technology, sorry. Okay, there we go. Well, we were founded in 2017 by 8 Native women, Jamie and I being 2 of them. And we really were we came together and wanted to support one another and support Native women in our community and uplift each other's voices and just really be there for one another and create space for ourselves and operating within systems, you know, as Indigenous people, but as Indigenous women, many of these systems that were, you know, basically created to exclude us and, you know, we're just really not meant for us. So a lot, you know, that kind of goes to our vision, which is to revolutionize systems and inspire innovation by investing in Native women in business and leadership. And we've always done this in co-creation with our community. That was like one of the very first things that we did when we started was we came to our community and we asked them what they needed, what they wanted, what would a Native Women's Business Summit look like. And with all of their hearts and their minds and their thoughts at the forefront, we had we designed what was the first Native Women's Business Summit in 2018. And that was held at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. And we brought together over 200 Native women from throughout the country. And we held a very just magical and historical moment there. And really, it was a validating moment for us that led to the following year in 2018, our second Native Women's Business Summit, where we were able to bring together over 300 Native women at the Isleta Pueblo Resort and Casino. And you know, since we have been through a lot as a nation, as a world, really, with the pandemic, something none of us saw coming, and we've had to pivot. But with that in mind, we've leaned on our values, which is the foundation for our organization and what everything was built on. And we like to call those our Biwi Values, in that we recognize that Native women are the backbones of our communities. We're emerging as entrepreneurs and leaders. We're weaving our ideas, community, and culture together to empower one another to manifest change. And that's just really what's held us together this entire time. And we've learned a lot during the pandemic. We've expanded a lot during the pandemic. And, you know, in spite of all that and the systems at play, and, you know, we've continued to remain resilient. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to my co-director, Jamie Glochet, who will share a little bit more about some of those challenges and what we've been doing to combat them.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Good morning. Jamie Glochet my name is Jamie Glochet. I'm Navajo, White Mountain Apache, and Kiowa, and from New Mexico. My grandmother's from Naizi, right by Chaco. My father's on my dad's side. We're from Arizona on the White Mountain Apache Res. So grateful to be here. Thank you to the summit for supporting us, and Suzanne and Bianca for the invitation. So as Alicia mentioned, we were co-founded by 8 Indigenous women, and really we were trying to solve problems for ourselves and our communities. And when I think about health equity and co-creation and community-led approaches, we actually had to look at ourselves and kind of think about what were the issues that were important to us. And that's how we came up with our values, as Alicia mentioned. We also had to kind of identify what was unique about us, and in all of it, in our values, as you've seen, we bring community as well as culture along with our lived and historical experience. So that's how we have like rooted in the work that we get to do. And when we decided we were all supporting entrepreneurs in some way. I was actually lending to entrepreneurs, and we have entrepreneurs in our co-founder group. And we wanted to kind of understand what the challenges and barriers were. And with the co-design with the first summit, we were actually looking at some indicators to kind of get a sense of what was the economic barriers that were in the way of women entrepreneurs, Native women entrepreneurs specifically. And we identified some key main issues and problems. One, we are incredibly invisible, maybe not here in New Mexico because we represent about 10% of the state population. However, in the rest of the country, in the 2010 census, I know our numbers have increased, but we were at that time less than 2% of the population. And when you think about from the gender perspective, we actually represent less than 1% of the population. So Indigenous women are incredibly invisible. There's a lot of erasure that's happening, and we're challenging negative stereotypes about us and about our people. So we essentially said we need to reclaim that narrative and own our story, and also remold our story and amplify who we are as people in this country. We also saw that pay inequity is a huge issue. So we, according to the 27 National Women's Law Center, we're paid 60 cents to every $1 compared to our non-Hispanic white male counterpart. And we see entrepreneurship as a pathway to close that pay inequity, because entrepreneurs can then, I guess, command or assert, the wage that they want to make. So we saw that as an opportunity to kind of address pay inequity. Last and certainly not least, but one of the biggest issues we face in our community, especially here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and today, actually, I think President Joe Biden recognized today as Missing Murdered Indigenous Women's Day, and there's you'll see a lot on social media about that. But violence is very near to us and present in our communities and our lives. And according to the 2010 National Institute of Justice, they're estimating that 1 in 3 Native women will experience violence in our lifetime. So just with those 3 problems, it was like, wow, we have a lot of challenges and barriers to address. And how do we, one, co-create solutions with our communities to identify that? How do we amplify our voices? And how do we problem solve within our communities, knowing that this has continued for a very long time and will continue if we don't do something about it. So all that to say, we're still here and we're still fighting. On the flip side of that, we actually saw some really interesting statistics on that Native women, and actually a lot of women of color in this country, we are actually the primary economic stabilizers. So in 2016, the policy for the Women's Policy Institute found that 2/3 of us are actually the primary breadwinners. I always joke and say we're also the bread makers in our communities. And at the 2017 State of Women-Owned Business report by American Express, they were showing that women-owned businesses were growing by about 114%, yet Native American women-owned businesses were growing by 201%. So by that, we're like, wow, we're growing businesses twice as fast as anybody else. Yes, we are a small population in numbers, but there's an opportunity here to support entrepreneurs, especially at the rate that entrepreneurs are growing. And when I talked about pay inequity, if we're the economic stabilizers in our communities, we have to ensure that those economic stabilizers, those breadwinners, those bread makers are fully supported. So that's kind of how we've converged on all of the work, is knowing that Indigenous women carry a lot of roles, whether it's mothers, caretakers, culture bearers, language, wisdom knowledge, cultural knowledge holders, advocates, leaders, you name it. We wear many different hats. And in that vein, we're very complex and multidimensional, and therefore should be seen and honored as such. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is, and I'll turn it over to Alicia after this, but this is kind of where we saw an opportunity. Like, we want to uplift and acknowledge that Indigenous women, Indigenous people have always been incredibly entrepreneurial. We've had trade and barter systems that have lasted prior to colonization over thousands of years, miles, cultures, communities. And we actually have always been entrepreneurial. We've had ecosystems and economies that existed prior to colonization. And in that vein, we have a social responsibility to live by example and show that business can be done in a way that's not extractive or exploitative of people and planet, and that we actually have a responsibility to show up as the matriarchs. I don't know if a lot of you know this, but a lot of Indigenous communities are matrilineal societies traditionally. Women held important roles in the community as critical decision makers, as leaders. So there is a movement towards rematriation that is happening, and we are part of that movement in honoring that women have a critical voice, not only in their own communities and their families, but also in this country. So that's what we're trying to do, is just ensure that we're showing up as the matriarchs that we are, while growing a movement of social entrepreneurs that are trying to solve problems for our own communities. Thank you. Next slide. Alicia, do you want to just do a little bit of the vignettes of some of the entrepreneurs that we work with?
Sure, yeah. So just to highlight a few of many of the incredible Native women that we have the opportunity to work with and support in community. Here is just a few. First, we have Tina Archuleta. She is from the Pueblo of Jemez, and she has a plant-based wellness company called Vitality, where she serves Indigenous catering. She does consulting on healthy and nutritious meals. She's also a doula and offers doula services. We're really excited for her because she's actually getting a storefront at the near the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center across the street. Actually, they're building out a space for her there, where she will actually be able to have Vitality held. And so it's a huge ordeal, and she's been a great champion of our work, and she's also accessed a lot of the resources, the programming, as well as the matriarch funds that we have offered to our community. Which actually, now that I mentioned that, do you want to share a little bit more about that, Jamie?
Yeah, I was just like, oh, I forgot to include that in our slide deck. So just to give the community a sense of what we do, first and foremost, we've convened our community, and what we learned through that convening is we can actually, and I'll share a little more about this later, but we actually are trusted in the community, so we can actually ask our community questions about what those challenges and barriers are, what are the solutions, and that's kind of where our magic lies, in the convening spaces. But out of that, what has resulted out of that is that we've actually developed our organization as a result of that convening and understanding what our community needs are. So we offer programming, so online workshops that are specific to Indigenous women entrepreneurs, primarily led by other Indigenous women entrepreneurs. We provide capital. We see that capital is a huge barrier in our communities. So we actually have created our own capital tools to fund entrepreneurs in our community because they're not able to access capital. And to Alicia's point earlier, some of the frameworks that exist in the financial world actually do not take into account the historical intergenerational oppression, trauma, and inequities that have existed in the financial world. So we're actually developing tools that take that into account and look at people in a very different way. So we're testing relationship-based lending with Co-op Capital, with Nusenda Credit Union, and another organization called Community Credit Lab, to prove that relationship-based lending is a pathway, especially for those who are unbanked or underbanked. And we're seeing incredible results from that. I think we see like a 99% repayment rate, and we funded nearly $500,000 to our community thus far in the past year and a half. Secondly, we also do direct investment with the Fair Trade Initiative that Alicia spearheads, and she can share more about that in a minute, because she's the one that's leading that. And then we also, capital programming, convening, Fair Trade Initiative, policy advocacy. Am I missing anything, Alicia?
Well, we can talk a little bit about the retreat space at the end.
Yeah, okay.
As what we're visioning,
sure.
Working towards.
Yeah, so all this to say is we're trying to look at our community as their whole being, not just as entrepreneurs. Like we understand, like I said, Native women carry so much and are so many different identities, and we try to speak to those identities and ensure that they're cared for in that way. So we actually offer technical assistance as well through our partnership with New Mexico Community Capital. So that's been our approach with working with our community. And just case in point with Tina Archuleta, she's weaving her cultural identity, her ancestral wisdom with plant medicine. She's actually a vegan, and she cares a lot about her nutrition, I guess her stance on nutrition. And then what her work has actually, I guess, emerged is she's actually a key leader in food sovereignty work, because she's trying to work with local farmers and folks that are and sourcing from local communities. And really her reason for starting this is she saw the health disparities that were prevalent in her own communities. She's mentioned high diabetes rates, heart issues, and that's essentially why she's created this business to address that health inequity that exists, the food inequity that exists in her own community, while closing her own racial wealth gap. So I'm just trying to paint like how health and wealth and entrepreneurship and economics all are like intertwined.
Yes, and you bring up a beautiful point, Jamie, of just how wonderful it is to see that our entrepreneurs really, their inspiration for starting businesses is to be of service to our community and to support. I think every single one of the Native women entrepreneurs that we've met with have always had that at the heart and center of their reason for wanting to even have a business. And with that, I mean, we have Haley Laughter. She is a member of Navajo Nation. She is weaving Navajo philosophy and yoga together for healing and wellness for our community. She came to our summits, and actually the last in-person one that we had, she led our community at the summit in some yoga practices, and we kind of wove that in throughout the day just to kind of support that healing and wellness element as we were together, because that's also really important to us, right? Our approach to business and wealth is very different through an Indigenous lens than it is through the rest of how the world views this. And that's something that we've really leaned back into, and how we're creating and how we're working with community and uplifting these businesses. We also have Stephanie Gutierrez. Do you want to share a little bit about her, Jamie?
Sure. I actually got to see her this past week. She has actually also kicked off this conversation around wealth, Indigenous concepts of wealth. She's the owner of Hope Nation. They do consulting work from Oglala Sioux Nation. She actually took Lakota, I guess, cosmology, ideology, philosophy, worldview, whatever you want to call it. And she talked about how communities view wealth. And in our community, we've often asked this question: how do you define wealth? And in the typical, as an entrepreneur, as a small business owner, as a nonprofit leader, and from that lens, like it's mainly like profits, assets, right? Like your net worth. But our people actually view wealth very differently. And I think that's one thing to highlight, is that it's about a definition, especially health. And we can go into that a little bit later. But our community defines wealth very differently. It's not just about your monetary value. It's actually more than that. It's about access to culture, to your ancestral homelands, access to your elders, access to your language, having that cultural connection and sharing your children have that Indigenous identity woven in them, being able to feed your community and your family. So it's a beautiful expansion of that definition that I think we're trying to articulate to folks that are non-Indigenous, that we actually, our worldviews are not so limited by just this one little definition that's based on economics, but it actually is a holistic worldview. And I think that it kind of intersects when you think about the social determinants of health as well. Next slide. Do you want to share about Nicole?
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole is amazing. She started what is Changing Woman Initiative. She's from the Navajo Nation. She's a midwife. And just founded the very first Indigenous Women's Birth Center here in Albuquerque. They have been just supporting Native women in their health journeys along the way. And it's been a dream for her to be able to have, and it's still moving, right? To be able to have something like this for Native women where we can go and be able to lean back into that traditional knowledge and wisdom and birth practices of our culture. It's something that a lot of women are reclaiming in our communities and becoming doulas and just really trying to bring that back, which is so special because, you know, I think, and just based on some of the experiences that she's shared with us about what she's experienced and also witnessed other Native women experience in the hospital and not being able to kind of lean into and have that support, why this is so critical that, you know, something like this exists now. And I don't know if you want to add to that, Jamie, but she's been a wonderful speaker and just supporter of Native Women Lead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Nicole and all of their examples are really pushing at those thresholds of understanding what equity looks like, right? When an Indigenous woman has support to amplify her voice and to bring her culture and her community along. Nicole, as a midwife and someone who's been in the medical field, has seen the inequities that exist, has seen the systemic racism that exists in that space. And she actually wanted to create a space so that Indigenous women feel safe and that they can access their cultural teachings and those Indigenous birth practices that have been with us forever. So it's just beautiful to see this now manifest. She had to raise a lot of money to start this. But it came from her own experience of one, not seeing a place for Indigenous women in the health community, in the health, and trying to, she's like, you know, catching babies all day and trying to create that space, but creating a space that felt loving and kind and safe and supportive, because oftentimes we don't have those spaces in our own homelands. So Nicole, I think, is definitely showing us how to do that in a way that she's centering Indigenous women. And from my understanding, there's other women, not just Indigenous women, that access her services and her care. And in the pandemic, she actually supported a lot of home births because women were very, one, disconnected from the healthcare system, but two, also were really scared to go into hospitals and during pregnancy. And so she was out in rural Native communities, catching babies and supporting women as they were navigating that in the pandemic. Next slide. Okay, so thank you so much just for hearing a little bit about the entrepreneurs. I hope we painted a picture that there's this really beautiful blend that women are bringing to their business ideas, but also to the work that they're trying to create, the problems they're trying to solve, and how they're looking at addressing issues in a holistic way. But we actually have always prided ourselves on like the co-creation process. And for us, what has been really helpful about co-creating with our community just since the inception of our organization is that having that community buy-in is so critical and important. One, it helps build trust with our community. And as a result of that, we've been able to ask our community questions, to do research, because there's a lot of data that we don't know about Indigenous women entrepreneurs because of that invisibility issue. It also helps to ensure that there's transparency. We are actually held accountable to our community because we're reflective of our community. And that, I think, in a way allows us to continue to, and supports us and ensures that we continue to act with integrity for the work that we do. Co-creation also helps us build a safe, brave, and inclusive space. So all of the summits are co-designed with our community, and it allows us to make space for everybody, and especially for folks that have been incredibly marginalized or silenced. It actually creates a safe container for people to voice their concerns and issues. I also think that the process of co-creation supports us to honor our lived experience. I know in many in this country, education or professional expertise is always held to like the standard as far as experience, but I feel like a lot of the people that we get learning and knowledge from don't have those traditional backgrounds of, you know, a master's level degree or all, you know, all these top jobs. They actually live the issues and are trying to create solutions in their own community. Yeah, do you want to add more to this? Or I can keep going through the bullet points, Alicia.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, I think on that note, I think what we feel truly innately in ourselves and in our communities is that everybody has value, right? Like it, and that comes in many forms. Sometimes, you know, there's different ways to learn, there's different ways to teach, there's different ways to share. So really challenging those systems as that be in play, like, you know, the economically, academically, that, you know, we have truly incredible people in our community that just hold so much of that knowledge and wisdom. Yeah, that helps in honoring their lived experiences, as well as identifying challenges and barriers. Sometimes things we can't figure out through these traditional systems, we can figure out in other ways. And a lot of that is leaning back into our tribal wisdom and knowledge, and understanding nuance, creating space for ideas and solutions, as well as increasing buy-in and support. I think this is always a for us bias kind of movement. Not at any point have we gone to our community and said, this is what we think is best, and this is what we think you should do. Right. We are always in co-creation, and you know, the community leads and the leaders follow, and that's kind of how it's been and how it's going to be.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it, like and we'll open up for questions, you know, after this, but I think it's what really has added the fire to the movement we built. And as a result of our community inclusion and the approach is that we've actually convened over 2,000 women representing over 200 different Native nations across Turtle Island. We have a network of about 10,000, and the fact that folks feel trusting of us to share their ideas and information, but also to raise those issues and concerns that they have, and then for us to kind of support in the problem solving and in honoring their wisdom, their autonomy, and their self-determination to the life that they want to live. But some of the elements of a community-led design for us, as I mentioned before, we're 100% representative of the community we serve. So that's where that lived experience, I think, also gets activated. We can understand and empathize with our community when they're talking about challenges and barriers. It's not a secondary experience. It's like, I know what that feels like. I know what you mean. And our board is actually 100% Native women as well. And this actually, I think, in a way, continues to validate the work that we do and that trust. We also try to ensure that a lot of the offerings that we give to our community are culturally relevant. For example, the financial tools that I mentioned earlier, they don't take into account the historical trauma or the systemic inequities that have existed in this country for far too long. And then they also don't take into account, for example, we're learning a lot about, I guess, how trauma affects the brain and therefore affects people's behavior with finance. So think about people who hoard, people who are risk averse, people who don't want to look at their financial statements, people that are putting their money under the mattress because they don't trust the banks. That's actually a result of distrust and trauma that has existed. So we actually try to take that understanding and that knowing of our own selves and weave that into the programmatic offerings and the interventions that we're doing within our organization. Secondly, we found this really helpful is that ensuring that we're the drivers in the design, the implementation, and the decision-making. We want to make sure that those parts are upheld for community to lead. Therefore, I guess to the approach of ensuring that community is bought in, they know this has been designed for us, by us, you know, and never without our permission. But what's really neat about that is that when we get to develop these programs or ideas or these offerings or these tools, we actually create internal feedback loops within our community to continually iterate and test and see if these interventions are working, and they're pretty quick. Like, we can ask our community, hey, is this working? Like, what landed, what didn't? What are some of the issues you see with this? And it also honors that we get to continue to activate voice within our community, so they feel like their voices are heard and uplifted, and that they're seen. And there's a bigger, I think, conversation that's happening now around power seeding, when you're building power within the community, power sharing, where not just one person or one entity is holding all the power, especially when you think about power structures that be, whether seen or unseen, and also power seeded, like giving power. One example I can say is with the Nusenda Credit Union, the Co-op Capital pilot. They are holding the money for us, so we don't have to worry about doing that. And we get to design the program that we create, and we get to design the underwriting approach. And that has been incredibly powerful, because it allows us to say, hey, like, Indigenous women can reshape finance, as well as we should be trusted to make decisions about flowing money to our communities. So it's just like a really interesting dynamic and conversation that's happening. And I think as it relates to health and wealth and those that hold those like power and control, honoring people's innate power, self-determination and sovereignty actually definitely has helped us kind of continue to challenge and change systems that be. Do you want to add anything else around that community-led?
I think you covered it, but I think, you know, that kind of just leads into our Indigenous worldview on health as Indigenous people, and kind of the approach that we've been taking of supporting, even just in business, right? As we redefine what business looks like, what success looks like, and how we've set up our programming to be, and our technical assistance to be culturally relevant and holistic, in that we support the person, right, the business in this way that places value on them as a whole, as a person. That includes spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, social, and environmentally. I think something that happened in the pandemic was that we saw, you know, it really shared a lot of the inequities in our communities, and those pieces that really challenge our community members in all of these ways, right? And I mean, we can list, the list is long, you know, everything from access to clean water, right, to broadband, to food, to healthy food, all of these pieces. And just seeing the resilience of our communities and doing what we can to support that. And also, I think just across the board, Native, non-Native, everybody, you know, mental health we're starting to see how important that was and is. And I think putting more emphasis on folks having that time for self-care and reflection, and just being able to take care of themselves, especially many of those that are in our community that their businesses are service oriented, you know, that they fill their cup, you know, because you cannot pour from an empty cup and do the work in community unless you are able to take care of yourself. And that's kind of where we see the economic stability, health education, healthcare, environment, community context comes into play in how we care for one another and care for ourselves, and really make sure that we're sustainable. I don't know if you want to add to that, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. Yeah, and just one example that I had noticed in the pandemic, one, we were all like really scared, right? Everybody, I think at the onset was, oh my gosh, like this is a global pandemic and people are dying, and oh, that's like so real. And it took an emotional toll, especially as all of us were like on Zoom and, you know, kind of Zoom fatigued. And what I noticed in our community was we didn't have access to ceremony. And that's a big critical thing that's important to us as Indigenous people, that we have access to that ancestral wisdom, and we couldn't convene and be together as people. And that's such a huge part of being from a community, is that we actually, community is big to us. Like having our family and our kin around us is incredibly important as a place to cope and to lean into in hard times. And having that aspect unavailable to us, I could see it was very wearing on people. So I know a lot of like Pueblo dances have come back. I actually was planning a coming of age, two coming of age ceremonies for my daughters in the pandemic, and I had to put it on pause because of the spread of COVID. And I can't really articulate it, but just that absence of it, of not being able to access my community as well as prayer and our own ways, was incredibly challenging, because that's a coping mechanism. That's a way that we heal, and that's a way that we navigate the world, and how we maintain connection. So that was one thing that I noticed that was incredibly hard. And just all this to say is that Indigenous worldview sees health not just in the physical sense of, you know, like the metrics that we collect when we go to the doctor. What's your weight? What's your heart rate? All of those things. It's actually interconnected. And I think what social determinants of health kind of aims to do is kind of understand all of those pieces. And I've seen that in my own, I guess, personal story. I had gallbladder disease a couple of years ago. I didn't know what was going on with me. I remember I was in incredible pain, and I went to the doctor many times, both the Indian Health Service as well as UNMH, went into the ER room and just saw firsthand what like medical racism looks like. I remember the second time I went to the ER and I was in incredible pain. The young doctor there was like, "What do you want to get out of this experience today?" And I was like, "Wait, what? I'm in pain, like help me. I'm like crying, can you see?" And luckily my mom was there, and she's a pretty strong advocate just generally. And she just was like, "All right, that's enough. I want to talk to your supervisor." And the supervisor came in and he saw that I was in pain. And I never felt like so, one, silenced, not acknowledged for the pain that I was experiencing, even though I had been sent multiple times back and forth from the hospital, that there was nothing wrong with me. Even though I was like crying and in pain and just wanting to feel normal, like that's all I wanted, just to feel normal. And luckily then I was rushed to get emergency gallbladder surgery. And after that, they were like, "Whoa, like your gallbladder was completely distended and it was like really, really bad." And so I had to deal with that. But the fact that my voice was silenced, the fact that there was this narrative or this bias or whatever from this doctor, that my pain wasn't valid, and the fact that I literally, you know, I could have been sent home again. Who knows what would have happened? I think that's very prominent, unfortunately. And the fact that he thought I was just there, it sounded like he thought I was just there to get like drugs. And that was really offensive to me. So it happens. And I think what I'm trying to get at here is that when people co-create these systems or these spaces for care and to address these issues that we see prevalent in many communities, when the community is represented, they can bring that lived experience in, and they can build trust, and they can mitigate trauma. Because that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to replicate trauma in the work that we do. And inclusion of those voices from the onset of program design or creation of spaces is so critical, because we already know what's not working. And I think with social determinants of health, like that, I really appreciate that framing, and like it sees how all things are connected. And it does take all of those things to be addressed so that people can live a healthy life and have access to equity, especially within health. Sorry, it's my own little story. But just to give you an example, I would like you all to just really consider this: is how do you define wealth? As I shared with our community, we don't define it just by money. We don't define it by assets or net worth or profit. It's defined very differently. So I encourage you all to think about that and reflect on how you define wealth and how that relates to health in your families, in your individual life, in your communities, and the work that you get to do. Next slide. Do you want to add to this? I think I've somewhat articulated, but I can add a little more, Alicia.
No, I think you covered, and I think we might be a little closing in on time if we want to make sure we have enough for question and answers.
Yeah.
But you know, to your point, I think in defining health and you know, the notion of health is wealth, right? We say that a lot, and the way that wealth is connected, I think you hit beautifully on to our culture, you know, and being able to access that as medicine, right, for our spirit, for our heart, for our minds, for our mental health, in addition to physical health as well, and just kind of keeping that in mind when we think about health and wealth.
Yeah, and on this, I just, you know, like trying to make that connection when I think about Native communities and the health inequities that exist. You know, a lot of them are systemic. My example was about, I think, institutional racism and bias that happens. When you look at some of the statistics within Native communities, as many people know, high poverty rates. Even in Albuquerque, I think it was a couple of years ago, they said that nearly half of the unsheltered population are Native people. And then when I look at other larger statistics, you know, home ownership rates are pretty low in our community. Access to capital is a big issue that we see. And I've heard about the measurement of wealth in the monetary sense. I think it was for the Black community that for every 8 cents of wealth that they hold, it's compared to every dollar that a white family holds. So health and wealth is definitely connected, and access to economic opportunity, economic empowerment, access to agency, the ability to make decisions, that is interconnected. And I think for us, when we're trying to make the connection of how our work informs health equity, we always say, like within the lens of equity, if you can address the problem for those most invisible, most marginalized, and you can create solutions for that community, you can actually do it for many communities. Oh yeah, the water cycle. Do you want to just like?
Yeah, I think just with that notion of how we look at the woman entrepreneur or leader or business owner in our community, and how we support and kind of reflect back to like the ecosystem, right, and the waterway, and how you know, the support that that we provide is almost like a circle, and it creates that waterway out so you can see how it impacts rematriation, sovereignty, safety, healing, agency, economic empowerment. And this is just kind of to share some of the offerings that we provide. As Jamie mentioned, the matriarch fund. So we have, you know, the capital and Make It Rain, and, you know, Onto the Tree, which is our community table building, a lot of our programming and the support that we provide. And then the circle of support, which is we have cohorts of women that are coming through that are getting funding that we're partnering with, and that we are essentially forming a circle of support between our organization, NativeWomenLead, as well as New Mexico Community Capital, just to help them find resources, mentorships, technical assistance. I mean, anything from a marketing plan, business plan, accounting, all of that. And then of course, in the spirit of reflection, we are huge on Indigenous enhanced evaluation. So always taking the time to be able to connect back and evaluate, what are we doing? Is it what the community needs? Is it what they want? And then also, you know, moving into the space a lot more of data sovereignty and data sharing and data protection of our communities. I think that's one area where we see, you know, a lot of because of historical traumas, a lot of tribal communities and Native people are very resistant and hesitant into giving their data. However, we know data is power. And when we're trying to tell a story and reclaim our narrative, that is how we do it. You know, by being able to share the statistics, by being able to show the numbers, the impact, and demonstrate that when we're advocating for ourselves or we're trying to, you know, reclaim that narrative. So spending extra time doing that. And then of course the Indigenous Women's Investment Fund and the Fund Fellowship, because we want to see more women have access to information about how they can build their intergenerational wealth within their families and their communities and be in this sector of finance, because we don't see many Native women or Native families being part of these conversations or even having these conversations. So it's kind of goes to that that cycle of you know, being out of the loop and being in financial strain, and we want to open up the doors to this mindset of abundance and being at the table for these conversations.
Thank you, Alicia. And just to add to that, when we were creating our own kind of a proposal to the problems and solutions forward, we were trying to articulate how Indigenous worldview is very holistic, and our non-Native folks were having a hard time understanding our approaches, and that all of our approaches actually fit in together in this like holistic way. And so as you see, the woman is intentionally centered and uplifted because she's who we serve. And part of this visual is we actually wanted to make it resonant to our environment. And we know in New Mexico and the Southwest, water is a very precious resource that we know is that we may not have a lot of. And when we thought about what does it mean to have a healthy water cycle, we thought, like, what does it mean to have a healthy waterway of Indigenous women entrepreneurs? And in the finance world, they always say pipeline. And for us, it was like kind of charged, because it was like, yeah, pipelines are very contentional in our communities, especially, you know, with oil and gas extraction has been happening all over. And so we said, actually, how do you build a strong and healthy water and an ecosystem for Indigenous women entrepreneurs? And the ripple effects are essentially our long-term outcomes that we hope to have. But it was our attempt to really demonstrate, like, this is how Indigenous people think. This is how we view the world. Everything is interconnected. And this is what could happen when you center and uplift Indigenous women. So that's also why we wanted to share this, because to the spirit of power building and co-creation and community-led design, that's kind of how we've been able to articulate that. And I think that's it, right? Yeah, and this is a photo from our first summit. April Tinhorn on the left, her daughter Zoe in the middle, and our now Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, who we all know was our Congresswoman for a little while, but this is right when she announced her, I guess, her run. And it's been beautiful to see what she can do, especially from that lived experience as an entrepreneur, as a Native woman, and now the impact and power and influence she has in this country, and working and leading the Department of Interior. Like, whoa. So we always say we're leading with the foundation of our ancestors and weaving in hope for future generations. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I think we got a few minutes maybe for some questions, if anybody. I'll go ahead and
Thank you, ladies. That was wonderful. Lots of good feedback. I think I'll give us a second. I'll see if there's any more questions coming through, and then I'll share some comments. But a few questions. You are the change while maintaining Native American values. What do you see as the main value of directing your own lives without outside interference? And I believe she answered it back. She said, I think you answered my question. So you might have answered that question while you talked, but if you want to say something to it.
I think agency is really critical. The ability to understand, like, the systems that be, right? The structures that be, the honoring of truth and history in this country, and holding lots of grace and compassion for ourselves, and even then seeing our own people and our own community as the experts, seeing ourselves as the experts to the solutions we seek. And with agency, I think that's the ability to make decisions on behalf of yourself, your family, your community. And I think that a lot of that was taken or stolen. So I think external of outside influence is just recognizing that those things have existed, but there's opportunity to change and challenge a system while you're within it.
Thank you, Jamie. Another question here. In your experience, do people come to your program with very detailed or loose concepts and ideas for incorporating health and wellness with their activities?
I think, you know, we really try to meet people where they're at. So we have a really wide threshold of folks coming to us that are pre-startup, you know, ideation phase, all the way on up to established businesses that are looking for capital and resources, and everybody in between. And it's really important to us to be able to just to be there, to be able to spend that time to learn their story, to hear their needs, and to find how we can support them in the best way possible. And a lot of that has to do with, on our end, making sure that we're developing partnerships and we're developing resources, and we have things to provide them on their journey with wherever they're at.
Jamie, did you want to share something else as well, or?
Can you repeat the question real quick? It was.
Yes. So in your experience, do people come to your program with very detailed or loose concepts and ideas for incorporating health and wellness into their activities?
I think it's both. And to the point earlier that, you know, they're bringing their culture and their community along. And what we're seeing kind of surface is definitely, and especially in the financial world, is how like trauma affects financial behavior. So yeah, I think it's both. And like Alicia said, we're meeting people where they're at, and people are all in different layers of their healing journey, self included. So I try to just be self-aware in that mindset. And I think that's also what's great about community-led and co-creation with community, because then it takes into account where folks are at, both like collectively and individually, while addressing the needs in real time.
Thank you. There were a few questions just regarding resources. I want to just let the audience know that you are listed as an exhibitor. And your website's on there as well. So if any of the attendees want to check out their website, the link goes directly to them. So you can learn more about their website and all the work that they're doing. I want to share just a few comments that came through. Let's see here. So wonderful presentation. Love the presentation. A true eye-opener. Thank you for voicing your experiences. It helps the rest of us to understand, and it needs to be said out loud.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Great presentation. And it is wonderful to hear how you engage the community and everyone's stories. Thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences. I love the idea of wealth as more than a monetary concept, and I will continue to live this philosophy. So
thank you.
Those are the main questions here. I'll just give the audience just a couple seconds to, if they wanted to unmute themselves and ask the girls any questions or give them comments directly. I'll give a few seconds.
Sure thing. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. It's great to see the turnout.
Yes, thank you. We appreciate you. And please, by all means, check out our website, nativewomenlead.org, and feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're here for you. We're here for community, and happy to support any of you in any way that we can.
Thank you so much, ladies. We really appreciate your time, your expertise, and sharing everybody's stories with us today. So thank you. For the attendees, thank you for joining us. I know this was our final day of sessions or presentations, but I just want to send a few more reminders just to remember to complete your evaluation so you can get those CEUs by including your name and email address. Any questions or for assistance, please email me at bianca@constellationnm.com. Also, we will be back today at 1 o'clock for a facilitated lead discussion. So you are more than welcome to join us in that, where we will put you into small breakout rooms with our facilitators. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Alicia and Jamie. I really appreciate everything that you've done, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your morning and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.
See ya.